Hello, Manchester. I'm Jon Hopwood, and I'm welcome to Ward 13. My guest tonight is Tim Smith. He's the state representative from Hillsborough District 17, which is Manchester Ward 10. Hello, Tim.
Hey, how you doing?
Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your background, what your experience was like that influenced you to enter politics?
Well, that could really be a whole 2-hour segment. I had a really complicated upbringing, but the short version is, I grew up in the 1980s in a working poor family, serious poverty until I was about 12 years old. Then, my mom was able to dig herself out of that. Growing up as a teenager, we were still poor, but not as bad as it was in the 80s,
Your mother, before you moved to Milford, before you came to Manchester, you lived in Milford,
Yep.
where you served on the school board committee, didn't you?
I was on the school district budget committee, and that
Okay.
was a very interesting experience.
Well, you have an interest in economics, do you not? You belong to a society of economists.
Yeah, I'm a member of the American Economics Association. It's been something I've, kind of been studying my whole adult life.
Let me, something Mike Lopez, the former alderman at large, told me. He said that on the board of aldermen, there are people like himself or Joyce Craig that do a tremendous amount of work doing in the budget process. And then there's just people that come in, hey, how do I vote? I understand you have a passion for actually reading the bills and actually doing research.
This is true. One of the things that I want to be as kind as possible to my fellow state legislators, but one of the things that surprised me the most was how few state representatives actually spend the time to read all of the bills. As far as I can tell, there's less than 5 of us. I mean, it's single digits. Most people will read some of the bills. I'm sure there are some who don't read any and just vote party line, and I don't have a very strong opinion of that. That's not my favorite thing.
There are actually lobbyists up there telling people how to vote, like the Liberty Alliance, which is funded by the Koch brothers.
Yeah, there's a few groups. They'll hand out these. I call them cheat sheets. Before
the gold card, there's
the blue card, the pink card, the gold card. They'll hand out these cheat sheets before the sessions, and literally they're waiting in the hallway handing out leaflets to representatives before we walk in a representatives hall that try and tell everyone how to vote on all the bills for the day. I mean, it's absolutely reprehensible. I have an incredibly low opinion of that practice.
Let me ask you what it's like. This is your first term. And you ran very successfully, or you wouldn't be the state rep from Ward 10 in 2012. What was it like to go to Concord? You must have had an idea of what the state legislature and the House of Representatives was, and what is the reality? What did you think before? Was there a culture shock when you arrived?
Yeah, there was a little bit of culture shock. Some things were exactly what I expected. Some things were better than I had hoped, and some things were worse than I expected. The lobbyists handing out checklists in the hall was one of the things that was a lot worse than I expected. I had no idea, it was that blatant. I don't want to call it the C word, but I don't really consider it
corruption.
Well, you said it, not me.
Think that I know you're very strongly opposed to what do you call that money that the lobbyists give out? It's not black money, is it?
Well, you can use whatever term you want. The normal term is soft money.
Soft money, and there's quite a bit of bribes in the way of trips, food, certain perks, right?
Well, there are perks that I do not take advantage of that will be offered by lobbyists, free meals, stuff like that. People who join, there's this front group called ALEC, which serves...
Can you explain what ALEC...
Yeah, they're Basically, the long story short is that they're a think tank funded by, conservative big interests, the Koch brothers, Karl Rove's fundraising group, a lot of different stuff like that. And they take money from businesses, large multinational,
like Walmart.
Yeah, and national corporations that will join and become members. And then the lobbyists for those companies will write bills and hand them to state legislators from all over the country to get introduced in their states. We had a bill in 2013, just off the top of my head, that I was very passionately against. That was an ALEC bill written by corporate lobbyists, literally word for word. That would have allowed companies to force their employees to get their salary on pay cards, which are these like prepaid debit cards instead of a paycheck.
And what would be the logic of that other than there would be a fee involved going to like banks and financial intermediaries?
It saves the company $8 a week.
Per employee or
Yeah,
$8?
per employee. And
okay.
and so that the employer could save $8 a week, you get stuck with these like extra withdrawal fees and everything like that. I mean, you have to pay to get your money out.
Wow.
I mean, it's an absolute scam. And some companies use those now, but they can't force the employees onto them. They can offer it as an option, like maybe someone
Right.
doesn't, for whatever reason, they can't cash checks. But this bill, an ALEC bill written by the lobbyists, would have allowed companies to force that on the workers. And I went up and spoke very passionately against that and was happy to see it
My
go
question
down.
about that, would that bill be targeting like the most vulnerable workers, like fast food industry,
Yeah, and
minimum wage employees?
Yeah.
Because I can't see in a big corporation where people have direct deposit in that.
Right.
This is actually going after.
Yeah, make no mistake. Corporate executives do not take their salary on one of those scam payroll cards. It's the people who work in the lowest wage, hardest, longest hours jobs that, get stuck with that. And they're already making incredibly small amounts of money. And then, we're going to hit them for an extra $5 just to pull their paycheck out of the ATM if they don't do it all at once.
Which after
It's
taxes
ridiculous.
is an hour's wage.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous that they were going to try and force this on a people. And I was very happy to see that go down. But that's an example of something that I was surprised about, talking about the culture shock. I didn't know how many bills like that there were going to be.
One thing I've heard said very often is that because of the way the legislature is, 400, and they are citizen legislators, $100 a year. You're not even pro-am. It's rather, there are a lot of people that are up there for those perks and to get the license plate. When I went up for the AFL-CIO endorsement, I'm going to be hit the double nickel in a couple of weeks. I was the youngest person there, it seemed. And the thing is, with 400 people, I've heard, and there's these vast swings, like 2010, then went to the Republicans in a big way, then 2012, the Democrats took over, that corporate people I know, business people, and other people, political activists say, it's almost every 2 years you have to re-educate a group of people, this new group of people.
There's a lot of turnover.
Right.
I don't remember the exact numbers, but again, this is my first term, and it was a large freshman class.
Oh, yes.
Because as a lot of people realized in 2010, the crazy Tea Party people swept the House. They picked up a ridiculous amount of seats.
Super majority. It was.
Yeah, and then in 2012, they were thankfully sent packing after the destruction that they brought onto the state government. And so a lot of us who replaced them were first-term legislators. So yeah, there's a lot of education that goes into it, not just in terms of like the parliamentary procedure, the committee process and stuff, but people who don't really have a lot of exposure to state government need to learn about how the state government works before they can try and be legislators.
Now, when I was up, I went up to Concord as a veteran to testify in front of the House and a Senate committee on Medicaid expansion, which I know you favored, and I favor, of course. What was that like? What was that battle like?
Oh my!
Was that like what you anticipated being a legislator?
That's what I would have anticipated out of Washington D.C. It was a dirty fight.
How much money was from,
well,
let's say, anti?
Well, I can't speak to what was spent lobbying it, but in terms of the actual debate and the process and everything to handle that bill and process it through the House, the first thing that people should know is that there were actually two Medicaid expansion bills. The first one, the governor called the House and the Senate back into special session at the end of last year in order to, do a bill for Medicaid expansion.
Which would have brought hundreds of millions of dollars into the state
and
that
this,
otherwise wouldn't have come without expansion.
Right, and this bill was recommended by a bipartisan joint committee, as the New Hampshire way that we should handle the Medicaid expansion here in the state. I try not to talk a whole lot about some of the partisan bickering, but the partisan bickering was in rare form. I mean, the Republicans got up there pulling out every legislative delaying tactic in the book to try and stop this. Some
of the right-wingers were very obnoxious.
They were. I mean, without going into without getting into the weeds.
Right. I think we know certain personalities.
Well, no. I mean, without getting into the weeds about parliamentary procedure, once the House was in session, they tried to use all these stall tactics and delaying tactics to try and delay the vote and just run out the clock. The rules of the New Hampshire legislature don't allow for a filibuster, and they allow the Speaker of the House to gavel out someone who tries to waste time. There's a rule against dilatory floor actions. But there's still a lot of ways they can gum up the works. They tried to introduce all these poison pill amendments that were like, okay, we'll expand Medicaid, but in order to apply for it, you have to speak Esperanto. Just ridiculous things, ridiculous things. And that ended up not passing through the Senate.
Right.
So then we had to come back in January for the regular session, and that's when the Medicaid expansion bill that finally passed was introduced and passed by both chambers. And again, it was a pretty vicious fight. The personal conduct of some of the legislators was very poor, and I think it's an embarrassment. I
actually experienced it when I was testifying in front of the House. I'm not going to mention a name of a particular legislator, but the attitude.
Yeah, I mean, there are some folks who, if
it was just a flippant attitude.
Yeah.
So I was talking about how this would benefit the veterans that, for various reasons, do not use the VA. And the flippant attitude of this person. I had a few sharp words for him, and that shut him up, but it didn't change his vote, of course.
Yeah, no, there are some legislators, again, I don't want to go into names, but if a vote or a floor action doesn't go their way, they act like petulant children. They'll run to the back of the hall, they'll shout for a quorum call, and then they'll leave the room.
And what does a quorum call require? That you all come back to your seats?
Yeah, it's just a quick button vote to see how many people are in the room, to see if you have a quorum. But it wastes time.
Time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, it's a petty thing to do. It's not. I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. It's not always like that. It's not a lot of people, but there are a small number, a dozen or so, who come from very safe partisan districts that, they could commit crimes and still get reelected.
I can think of a couple already, but we won't mention them.
It's crazy sometimes.
They're notorious, in fact.
Yeah,
and it's a shame that there's no reporting of their antics.
Yeah, there's no reporting.
Just ignored.
It never gets covered. There's TV cameras and newspaper reporters in Representatives Hall every session day, I'm not going to make any, statements as to why it might be the case.
Right.
But they completely ignore and fail to cover, some of this poor behavior.
Let me ask you one thing before we go on to another subject. Is Medicaid expansion under threat if the Republicans retake the House?
Yes. One of the procedural rules and the constitutional rules that comes into play is that no legislature can bind a future legislature.
Really?
Right. So, when the next session of the House comes into session in December and into January, people can file bills doing whatever they want. They can file a bill to rename the state. They can file a bill to completely repeal the Medicaid expansion program. They can, they can file bills to do whatever they want. I'm not saying that it's going to pass or that it's going to pass constitutional review by the judicial branch. But yeah, absolutely. All of the gains that we made during the last 2 years trying to clean up the mess from the Tea Party,
and it was a mess,
a huge mess, are absolutely under threat. if the House flips, or flips too far into the other direction.
The Union Leader today had on the business page about New Hampshire's economy is lagging. And the way I see it, the disaster that was the Tea Party legislature for 2 years. It talks about how the young professionals that have in previous years come to this state, been attracted to this state, are not coming this time. They were the drivers that got us out of previous recessions. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that when you have people that are cutting university funding by half, that are attacking schools, that both you and I are actual, we support the Second Amendment, but we don't support the Second Amendment to the degree where you can have a rocket launcher on your car or something.
Yeah,
I think of these people would.
Yeah, I think we could agree that a 24-hour waiting period before you buy a grenade launcher is not an unreasonable thing to do.
But my point is, it's the culture that created this extreme negativity. But there's also these economic policies. You don't cut funding by one half. Higher education is one of the drivers of economic growth.
Right.
And I watched a show about infrastructure, about New Hampshire's infrastructure. The lack of spending on infrastructure has been disastrous.
Oh, it's terrible. And
can you talk a little about why was there a battle to, number one, expand our highway system, which it was a battle royal, and number two, I cannot believe, as somebody who's lived in California, New York, that we don't have a rail link to Boston.
Well, it's a complicated issue, and there are a number of factors that come into play. The first thing that kind of gets into the themes that a lot of these Tea Party ideologues who run for office, and some of them get elected, they have all of this ideology, they don't have any sense of how to actually govern a state. They don't understand what it takes to keep the trains running, to keep the street lamps on, and they just run slash and burn over the budget without any sense of responsibility for what is actually going to happen, a month, a year, 5 years later. Like we had talking about infrastructure. The state legislature just passed the first highway bill we've had in over 20 years, and that was a big deal. It was a bipartisan bill. It was written by a Republican senator who I have a lot of respect for, and it was passed in the House. One of the facets of the bill is that it increased the gasoline tax by 4 whole cents. Most people didn't even notice when that went into effect.
Did that even keep up with the inflation rate? 20 years?
Well, I'll get to that in a second. Yeah. But and the price of gasoline has even gone down, since the gasoline tax went into effect. And people they cried about, oh, it's a 22% increase, and they used verbal trickery to make it sound like it was more than 4 cents, because people think the gasoline tax, oh well, it must be like $1 a gallon or something like that. It's not. It's 12 cents before and 4 cents now. It's not a lot of money. But the reason it was 4 cents now is because we haven't had a highway bill in 20 years. It was 4 cents this year because it wasn't 1 cent 10 years ago, because of the short-sightedness, of a lot of these folks who have this ideology of never raise any taxes no matter what, even to keep pace with inflation, and, just cut spending. It doesn't matter what the ramifications are. And then here we are, we get to 2014. We've got crumbling bridges all over the state. We've got a record-breaking number of red-listed bridges. And like the I-93 expansion, if we hadn't passed that bipartisan highway bill, there was no other plan on the table. Like, the money would have dried up.
You mean the federal money?
Well, no, all of
federal and state.
It would have dried up for the I-93 expansion. Literally, we would have sent the road crews home and left the work half done, sitting there collecting rust.
And
You
let
know,
me-
I mean, it's
yeah.
absolutely irresponsible because, again,
Right.
some of the Tea Partiers who were left over from 2010 who were not sent home, they went up there and gave these speeches how it's government tyranny to raise the gasoline tax, and, it's not the role of the government to pave the roads. I mean, ridiculous ideological
Not
stuff.
the role
Yeah.
of government is to provide roads.
Yeah, exactly.
That's in our Constitution, the infrastructure.
Right,
The
and
mechanisms
again,
for infrastructure.
It's the ideology with some of these folks where they have, these grand ideas, but they don't have any sense of how to actually govern the state.
Well, I wanted to say the lack of the roads, the lack of the infrastructure is actually discouraging the state from being able to woo businesses up from Boston and Massachusetts and other states.
Yeah, the New Hampshire business community was firmly supporting the highway bill.
Right.
I mean, it's a common sense thing for the state to maintain our public infrastructure. I don't understand, how so many people were so passionately against it when there was no other plan on the table. It would have been one thing if they were opposed to some of the details and they came back and said, here's our alternative on how we can fund it differently or allocate the money better or whatever. But there was no other plan available. And the plan we had was okay. It's not like it was a terrible bill.
Now, Tim, one thing I think that distinguishes you from the people that preceded you as state reps is your record of constituent services. I know for a fact that certain Tea Party, Liberty Alliance people, whether they were aldermen or state reps, if you didn't have their ideology and if they decided they didn't like you, they wouldn't do anything for you. And if they don't like a project, like say food stamps or anything, they're not going to help their constituents, are they?
Well,
Can you talk about constituent services in your own?
Yeah, I mean,
record?
I can't speak to what anyone else was doing, but for me, part of being a state representative is exactly that. It's serving the district. When I get someone who calls me up because they're having trouble with the state agency, they can't get some paperwork through or something like that, I'll go the extra mile to get them in touch with the right person and get the ball rolling on their stuff. I had one constituent a few months ago, an elderly lady who, bless her heart, nicest, sweetest little old lady you'll ever meet. She sent in her form to try and renew her food stamp benefits. But apparently the paperwork got lost. And, she was elderly. She got confused by the automated phone menu. And she couldn't find any way to get anyone to help her out. So, I got in touch with the appropriate people at HHS and had someone call her so that she didn't have to fight through, the automated phone system that she was having trouble with. It's little things like that that takes me, a whole half an hour. That'll make a tremendous difference in someone's life. And, as you mentioned earlier in the segment, we don't get a real paycheck. To me, that sense of satisfaction and accomplishment of having actually helped people, that's what I take away from it.
Tim, we've got a couple of more minutes. Would you like to? There's your camera as I point out to some of my guests. What would you like to say to the people of Manchester, Ward 10, the district, and the state of New Hampshire?
Well, I guess the main thing, that I think a lot of people should do is to pay attention to state level politics. We mentioned earlier some of the legislators who get up there and they act irresponsibly on a personal level. It's because they keep getting reelected because nobody really follows what they're doing. The media doesn't report on it as much as I feel they should. So, we have to investigate that ourselves and be informed citizens and be informed voters and make sure that when we vote for someone, we're not just voting for them because we like their policies. We're voting for them because we like the way that they're going to represent our district. And if they're going to show up in Concord and be a dignified professional, that's the sort of representation we want.
How critical is it for voters to vote down ticket? Many voters go and they think about the top race, U.S. Senate, Congress, and governor. And many voters, surprisingly, don't go down ticket. They ignore the state representative, whereas while a senator and a congressperson passes the law, isn't it true that in Concord, people like yourself implement those laws?
Yeah, it's very important, that people pay attention to the down ballot races, not just state legislature, but county and even municipal elections, when we have those every other year. And it's equally important that people, try and do 15 minutes of research
Right.
and find out who they're going to vote for.
You serve, I just found out something interesting. As a state rep, you serve on the county board, don't you?
Yep.
What is the county board?
It's the county level legislature that, votes.
County level legislature. I wonder myself.
It meets a couple of times a year and sets up the county budget. And we should do another show just talking about that. You want to talk about the crazy partisan shenanigans and, the Tea Partiers' bad behavior. It really comes out at the county level.
The county, because the county, I just recently found out that we actually have this legislature. And I think of myself as fairly well informed. So that's just yet another critical issue, why the vote for state rep is so important. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. We had, without going into a long segment about it, I know we're short on time, the county board sets the budget for the county, for the county retirement home, the prison, the sheriff's
Yes.
department. And, again, you want to talk about some of the partisan gridlock. Almost all of the Republicans voted against the county budget because, they had minor ideological problems with individual line items, and they had no alternative plan. So if they had their way, we would have just opened the county jail. We would have just sent the sheriff's deputies home. We would have just closed the retirement home because there would not have been a county budget.
Why the brinksmanship? Is it just ideology?
A lot of it is. You'd have to ask people individually to find out what their motivation is for how they conduct themselves and how they vote on stuff.
You yourself, though, even though you're a liberal Democrat like myself, you are dedicated to pragmatic solutions and bipartisanship, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, I have my own ideas about the philosophy of government and all of that, but sometimes, I'm realistic enough to know that that's not going to match up with what we need to do right now today to make the state work. And I'll work with anyone who has a genuine interest in keeping the state functioning.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tim, and I'd love to have you back. Maybe just before the election we can talk again.
Yep.
Well, Manchester, thank you. It's that time where I say good night. Thank you for visiting Ward 13.